Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Wendy Griffith. Today, have schools in Virginia discriminated against outstanding students, supposedly to help other students in the name of equity? The battle over raising the government's debt ceiling. Republicans want spending cuts, but the White House says no negotiations. Is America more vulnerable to dangerous cyber attacks that could affect your life because of changes from the COVID pandemic? And how one mom and dad decided their kids needed a digital detox away from their phones and computers and the changes it made in their lives.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin in Virginia, where one of the nation's most prestigious high schools is under investigation over claims that several school districts discriminated against high-performing students in the name of equity. At least 13 schools failed to notify students that they won national merit honors, and that could hurt their college prospects. Governor Glenn Youngkin is already proposing legislation to make sure it never happens again. CBN's Brody Carter has the story.
Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology is ranked as America's #1 high school, according to U.S. News and World Report. Now the Attorney General is investigating the Fairfax County School for unlawful discrimination.
We know that the admissions went from Thomas Jefferson being about 73% Asian American down to 50%, 50-some percent. So it was close to a 20-point drop.
Instead of academic performance, Attorney General Jason Miyares is looking into whether an equity-based admissions policy by Fairfax County Schools means Thomas Jefferson is guilty of violating the state's anti-discrimination statute. He notes that the Fairfax Public Schools superintendent paid an equity consultant $455,000 for 9 months' work.
We know that this equity consultant made a series of recommendations to the school district. One of the recommendations is equal outcomes for every student with no exception. You hear the word equity all the time, and the point I like to make is that equity without excellence is emptiness.
Meanwhile, a second investigation at the same school raised other questions regarding treatment of students.
We started to look into the admission standard at Thomas Jefferson High School. You have to apply to attend. And then the national merit issue popped up.
That issue being at least 13 Virginia schools failing to notify students of their national merit scholarship status in time for college application season. The award honors the top 3% of students nationwide with scholarship opportunities. Miyares now expanding the investigation to determine if the schools withheld the information from students because of their ethnic background.
It is two branches of the same tree. We're looking at the admission standards at Thomas Jefferson High School, which is a governor's school you have to apply to attend. And then we're also looking at what was the reasoning why you had the systemic problem of failure to recognize all of these National Merit Award winners, over 70% of which were Asian American. Were you deciding not to do that because of their racial or ethnic background?
My initial thought was, did you find out about this like months ago and just didn't tell your mom? Because he's a 16-year-old kid.
Shana Yashar says her son is one of those students notified more than a month after the awards went to Thomas Jefferson. The school's director of student services tried to explain why.
He told me that they were holding on to them so that they could hand them out at a discrete time so as to not hurt the feelings of the kids that did not receive the award.
This delay could cause Shauna's son and more than 1,000 students at those schools to miss deadlines for adding the recognition to their early college and scholarship applications.
We know that by a rough count, over 1,000 students have been affected. We're trying to determine how many years this has been going on.
The Attorney General plans to update the public with additional information as the investigation presses forward. Brody Carter, CBN News.
Thanks, Brody. Incredible. In Washington, disagreements over raising the government's debt limit so it can keep operating. Congressional Republicans say something needs to be done about the nation's $31.5 trillion national debt, and they want to talk about spending cuts. But the White House says the debt limit needs to be raised without negotiations. Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka brings us the story.
Lawmakers in the White House will try to avoid any fiscal crisis that could come from gridlock. The limit caps how much debt the government can have, and Congress has regularly raised the ceiling so the government can keep paying its bills and not default on the debt. The White House has made its position clear.
In the past, we have seen this. Both Republicans and Democrats come together to deal with this issue. It is one of the basic items that Congress has to deal with, and it should be done without condition. So there's going to be no negotiation over it. This is something that must get done.
Even the threat of default can be bad for the economy and livelihoods while creating volatility in the stock market. While Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warned about this week's deadline, she can use extraordinary measures and likely move money around until the summer as lawmakers figure out what to do next.
The fact of the matter is we can do deficit reduction. We can deal with our national debt. But at the same time, the last thing we ought to be doing is playing chicken with the American economy.
The divided Congress complicates the situation. The House Republican majority wants spending cuts in exchange for raising the ceiling.
And we know where we're sitting at, almost $32 trillion in debt. How could you do this to a future generation that in anything we do, why wouldn't we sit down and talk, and especially with something as serious as debt, but as serious as a debt limit, why would you want to wait till the end?
Republicans are also urging Democrats to come to the negotiating table.
Both sides are going to have to be willing to work together. We have a large groups on both sides of the aisle that's my way or the highway. That does not work in our country. And I encourage President Biden to reach out to the leadership on the Republican side. You know, in the last 2 years, he's invited the Republican leadership to the White House twice. That's not a very good record, but we got to do our part too.
Matt Gelka, CBN News.
Thanks, Matt. Turning overseas now, the protests inside Iran calling for the overthrow of the Islamic government are now in their 4th month. Chris Mitchell shows us one effort in Jerusalem where Israelis are supporting the Iranian people's cry for freedom.
This mural hanging in a Jerusalem neighborhood is intended to send a message of Israeli solidarity with the women of Iran.
Well, the purpose of the mural is to bring awareness to what's happening in Iran. There are murals all around the world right now, but this mural in Jerusalem is head and shoulders, in my opinion, above all the rest, because it's important for me to show the world that the Jews, the Israelis, are standing with the Iranian people fighting for freedom.
The idea began in San Francisco after Iranian-American filmmaker Neumann helped create a mural supporting Iranian protesters that went viral on Instagram. It caught the attention of Jerusalem Deputy Mayor Flor Hassan Nahum, who organized Israel's first demonstration supporting the people of Iran.
We felt that it was only right to do something in their honor so that they can hear our voices of support.
The 21 by 15 portable banner carries the slogan, "Women, Life, Freedom," and highlights 4 of the women murdered by the Islamic regime during this revolution.
The women who are basically the frontline warriors of a war in Iran.
The artist draws the connection of women and their hair because Iran's so-called morality police killed Mashar Amini for exposing part of her hair, sparking this national movement and international support. Also, it's the women of Iran taking the lead in the protest.
And the women are the ones ripping off their hijabs. They're sitting in the streets, they're fighting, they're risking life and limb, literally risking life and limb.
Now, nearly 4 months into this revolt, the regime is executing more protesters. And yet, Khalili feels the protests are still not getting the attention they deserve.
Right now, the Western media isn't really covering this. And my hope and prayer is that the U.S. will follow Israel's lead and say, look, we need to cover this. We need to, at least in the media, in the press, support the Iranian people.
Khalili says many do not realize the ancient bond between Israel and Persia, modern-day Iran.
Biblically speaking, there was a time where Israel and Persia, the Persian Empire, now Iran, were close. They were friends. They supported one another, and they loved one another. And I want that to return. I want Iran to support Israel and Israel to support Iran.
Well, we stand with the people of Iran because we stand for human rights everywhere in the world. We stand for freedoms everywhere in the world. But secondly, Iran is in our region. This is our neighborhood. And we have a country that is not only subjugating murdering its people. It's murdering people in the entire region.
Halili and Hassan Nahum hope this is just the first of many murals in Jerusalem and throughout Israel.
Once the Persian people, the Iranian people, see this mural is standing in Jerusalem, I think it's going to melt heart and open eyes.
And I hope and I pray that those women in Iran hear our voices loud and clear. We are with them, women, life, freedom.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
God bless them. Thank you so much, Chris. Well, coming up, is America now more vulnerable to cyber attacks that could affect our lives because of changes in the way people work after the COVID pandemic? We'll hear from one expert who explains why it's possible when we come back. Human error or cyber attack. The Federal Aviation Administration blamed a corrupt computer file for the system outage that caused the halting of all U.S. flights last week. But one cybersecurity expert believes the outage could have been a cyber attack. Appearing on this week's episode of The Global Lane, cybersecurity expert Eric Cole says that outages occurred both in the U.S. and Canada on the same day, and he believes the incident is highly suspicious.
These systems have redundancy. They have backups. They have ways to be able to recover. So when I hear that there was a database error, and then, as you said, there were two different systems that went down on the same time, I'm like, okay, saying it was human error keeps everyone calm. But in reality, it really does sound like a cyber attack and that something went wrong that was unplanned for.
Okay, if it was a cyber attack, who may be responsible? I mean, right away we think Russia because of the war against Ukraine, the Canada and the U.S. are supporting.
Yeah, I mean, Russia lately has always been on the list, but we also forget that China is also a big target, especially when it comes to critical infrastructure. And there's also a lot of freelance cyber adversaries that are out there that are really big on ransomware, extortion, and things like that. So from my standpoint, it sounds like what we call a test attack, where they wanted to test and just see how vulnerable the systems were, whether they could get in, and how long it would take them to recover. So to me, the critical part for the FAA right now is to really figure out if it was a cyber attack, to figure out how they got in and make sure they fix it, because this sounds like it's going to be one of many attacks in our future.
The FAA software, as you know, is 30 years old. Why is it at least 6 years away from being updated, Eric?
When you're dealing with critical infrastructure, like air traffic control, utilities, and even hospitals, uptime availability is critical. And anytime you patch or update a system, there's a chance it could crash. I'm sure you've had it at your home when you did an update or they said, oh, it's just a basic patch. All of a sudden things don't work and things stop operating. So it sounds bizarre, but the more critical a system, the less we update it, the less we patch it, and the more vulnerable it becomes.
So how likely then is another shutdown or cyber attack, not only against an antiquated FAA computer network, but other critical government networks? Just how vulnerable are they?
Unfortunately, they are very vulnerable for that reason you said. These are old systems. They're not typically updated. They're not typically patched. And the big problem is they're starting to be interconnected. And that's where the problem comes in. These systems were designed and built to be what we call in cybersecurity an air gap, which means completely isolated from any other system or the internet. But what's been happening over the last year or two is they're interconnecting these to the internet and other systems to make them easier to use. And because of that, this to me is just the beginning. And this year, we're going to see a lot more of these attacks happening because of that.
Did that happen with remote work because of the COVID shutdowns?
That was one of the big drivers where this whole work from home or work from anywhere, now all of a sudden you had systems that needed to be accessible if somebody wasn't in the office. There were systems that needed to be monitored, like the FAA systems, when somebody is not in one of their secure facilities. So yes, that was the trend that started it. And instead of us weaning away from that, now that people are coming back in the office, we're actually doing more and more interconnectivity, which is great for ease of use. but is one of the worst possible things we can do for cybersecurity.
So how true is it then, I want to go back to this, that most Russian hackers are concerned about extorting money from companies, schools, other networks, pledging to shut them down and destroy their networks if they don't pay up, and then Chinese hackers who may be more interested in stealing secrets and sensitive information?
That's very spot on. We can usually guess with a high reliability who's doing it based on those symptoms. And then we have to remember that Iran, Venezuela, North Korea are all recognizing the value of cyber attacks and how vulnerable our systems are. So they're also starting to launch these attacks for the same reasons. Most of them tend to be more monetarily driven. China is really the one that's focused a lot on intellectual property theft, but there's a lot more players that are targeting us just because of how easy and simple it is to do.
And Eric, I can't let you go without asking you about TikTok. ByteDance, the Chinese company that owns TikTok, employs more than 100 Chinese Communist Party members. So there are many security concerns about this social media app, and the CCP is mining user information, data for nefarious purposes. So just how risky is it to have this app on your phone?
To me, it's very risky, and I know a lot of parents look at me or push back going, Eric, it's videos. How harmful could a video be? But what they're missing is it's not the video. It is the access to your device. TikTok has access to your device, your data, your information, your microphone, your camera, all those factors. So it really is now a built-in spying tool that they can access information and details outside of the videos. And the other factor is it also can track personal behavior. Imagine if a government can track U.S. citizens' behavior for 15, 20, 30 years and build a database of predictability. That's a huge vulnerability to the country. So if you fast forward TikTok 20, 30 years from now, this creates a huge national security problem.
Also in this week's episode of The Global Lane, a look at the world's worst countries when it comes to persecuting Christians and why one Christian leader hopes unity can be restored to America if people can agree on common moral views. You can see these stories and more on The Global Lane tonight on the CBN News Channel at 8:30 Eastern or the CBN News app and on YouTube. Still ahead, why a mom and dad decided their 6 kids, all under 12, needed a digital detox. We'll look at the changes it made in their lives and why it worked for them. We'll hear their story and how you can do it too right after this. Children in America spend a huge chunk of their day staring at screens on their phones and other electronic devices. For some, it's an addiction that could follow them into adulthood. That's why one mother took a drastic step and pulled the plug on her kids. Jenna Browder brings us the results of this family's digital detox.
It's the day and age we live in. Technology rules, and sometimes we just need a break. And that's especially true for kids.
We had noticed some behaviors in our kids after screen time that we didn't really like.
Just ask Molly DeFrank, mother of 6, all under the age of 12.
And it wasn't until we fully pulled the plug on all of their screen entertainment cold turkey, we gave them a break. And it wasn't until we did that it was like removing a filter from our kids. We finally got our kids back. And ever since we have made that decision, I've been helping other parents do the same thing.
Her new book, Digital Detox, the 2-week tech reset for kids, begins by taking parents step by step through a 2-week cold turkey detox for their kids. Talk to us a little bit about some of your strategies to, cut back on screen time for parents. I think a lot of parents are kind of at a loss. They don't know what to do here.
You're absolutely right. Most of the parents I help are great parents of amazing kids, and they're already working to monitor their kids' screen time. They're taking away time for bad behavior. They're adding some back, and they're finding it's still not working.
Molly says it comes down to brain chemistry. Too much screen time creates excessive levels of dopamine in the brain, the kind that can be addicting. And for kids, it's a problem that can follow them well into their adult lives.
What you're actually doing is you're resetting your kids' dopamine levels, because when they're scrolling, when they're playing, when they're tapping, their dopamine levels in their brains are excessively high. So real life can't compare. That's why they're complaining of boredom. But when you give them this 2-week window to reset those levels back down to real life, you're giving them time to rekindle a love of real life activities.
Things like playing outside, arts and crafts, reading and writing. The second half of the book helps parents come up with a long-term strategy, using their observations from the detox period. So how often should families do a detox?
And it's going to be unique for every family and child. So once you kind of get that calibrated right for your kids and your family, you should be good for a while. But there have been families who it's gotten out of place again and they've done another detox. And this is great. In fact, a lot of these Silicon Valley engineers and CEOs, they'll give themselves dopamine breaks too. So this is it's science-based, and the results are really, the proof's in the pudding.
Molly says for most families like hers, it's not about eliminating technology, just making sure it's in its right place.
And most parents find, pretty much every parent who's reported results back to me has said that their kids get along better, they find new real-life productive hobbies, and they're happier. Their mental health is better. It's just across the board beneficial to these kids.
Her own kids are a testament to that. In just 2 weeks, she says they were free from the grip of technology. Mood shifted, creativity exploded, and they learned how to entertain themselves and enjoy life without screens. And yours can too. Molly says it can be difficult at first, but giving your kids a break from technology is something that will pay off for them and the entire family for years to come. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Coming up, she achieved her dream at the age of 100. We'll bring you her story when we come back. Stay tuned. A New York woman is officially a high school graduate, and it just took her 100 years to get there. Pearl Neumann grew up in the Spencerport Central School District, but was too busy working to finish school. After devoting years to her family and career, the centenarian finally received her diploma at her old high school.
Say, stand on your own two feet and you do anything you want to.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad I'm tickled pink. Yes, I am.
Well, this is your official diploma.
Boy, she's got a lot of energy. The school district presented Neumann with her own school ID, and she will be included in a class of 2023 display at her alma mater. Wow, she's got a lot of fire left in those bones. Good for her. That's encouraging to all of us. Never give up on your dreams. That's going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel anytime or online with cbnnews.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. God bless.